Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit on the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. First, let me thank our hosts for their generosity in opening up this great facility this morning. And I welcome our distinguished witnesses and thank them for their testimony as well. This is the fourth hearing that we have held since I've been subcommittee chair. Over 6 years, we've done 4 of these hearings to go over the oversight of this project. We've been discussing for quite some time the higher costs, the projections. As chairman, I've scrutinized the authority's confusing business plans that are clearly not grounded in reality, and I've warned that the continued disregard of facts on the ground will lead to skyrocketing costs and public outrage. And here we are today, discussing a business plan that has grown to a $100 billion cost estimate. And that's without, when it passed, some of us here voted for or against this in the legislature when it was on the 2008 ballot. It was supposed to include the North Valley and Sacramento area. This $100 billion does not include San Diego, south of Los Angeles, nor does it include the original plan to include the Sacramento area. And yet it is still $100 billion. It was also supposed to be done by 2020, 2 years from now. And now, if Sacramento is ever included, it would be 2 decades beyond that. So continued oversight of this project is important, not just to the Central Valley and for California, but for the nation as well. This project is continuing to become the poster child for mismanagement and runs the risk of diminishing public perception of much-needed passenger rail projects across the country. This is one of the reasons why in 2017 I requested a federal audit from the U.S. Department of Transportation Inspector General Cal Scoville, who's testifying here today. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Scoville about the methodology and trajectory of the audit moving forward. This project has been awarded nearly $4 billion in federal funding, and it represents nearly 40% of all high-speed rail funding for the entire country awarded by the Federal Rail Administration. That's an investment made by the federal taxpayer as the country has watched costs go up, plans change, and scope of service reduced. When the voters of California approved Prop 1A to fund this project, they thought they were approving a $33 billion project. It barely passed at 52% of the vote, but that $33 billion was also promised $9.95 billion coming from the taxpayers of California. It was supposed to be put together in equal thirds with the taxpayers on the hook for that $9.95 billion, and approximately the other 2/3 coming from federal government and private financing. And now the estimate is $100 billion without San Diego or Sacramento. With the authority's record of consistently missing deadlines and experiencing cost overruns, the authority itself has given no one in the Central Valley, in my district, reason to believe that anything in regards to this project will go according to plan. I'd like to start off by highlighting some of the changes, even from the 2016 business plan to the 2018 business plan. The schedule for completing the segments has slipped by several years from the 2016 plan. Completion of the Valley to Valley segment changed from 2025 to 2029. And Phase 1 estimated completion has gone from 2029 to 2033. Again, Prop 1A was supposed to be completed LA to San Francisco, to San Diego, to Sacramento, 2 years from now for $33 billion. Now, if you have that entire project, you're looking at a 2-year decade delay and over $100 billion in increased cost. The estimated funding shortfall is roughly equal on the first segment of this, the Central Valley segment, now that it's changed from the Central Valley north to San Francisco. that estimated funding shortfall is roughly equivalent to the cost of building the tunnels through the Pacheco Pass to link Gilroy to the Central Valley segment. The concern of this going forward is even for this new blended route, just from the short of Bakersfield, outside of Bakersfield to San Francisco, the funding gap is the cost that it would take you to go through the Tehachapis. Meaning even in this short term, the missing funding piece and the delay that we have still ends up not completing the segment at all. Look, here's the bottom line. California voters narrowly approved this with 52% of the vote. That was done in 2008. It was based on a business case that is unrecognizable today from even the authority's own plans. If this project is going to move forward and the authority is going to continue to ask for more tax dollars from the federal government, we need to know what those funds or finances would be. If the authorities, if they can't provide specific deliverables in a time frame, then I believe that California voters deserve the right to take this back to the ballot and decide whether or not they still support a new project. Keep in mind that most of the federal money allocated to this project was part of the previous administration's stimulus package, yet we're here today, 10 years later, with very little to show for it. The Inspector General audit will analyze the protocol that was followed to ensure safeguards were in place when allocating, expending those grants. As well, we've got other issues in California. We're still facing a water crisis here, and a fraction of this money could have solved our entire water crisis. Still creating the same jobs, some would argue more jobs. But as elected leaders, we've got an obligation to make sure that we are good stewards of the tax dollar. And it's unfortunate that the state doesn't have that same political commitment to providing a reliable water supply to California as it does funding a bullet train that has not, is not, and will never deliver on the promises that were originally made to voters. At this time, I'd now like to recognize Mr. Garamendi for 5 minutes for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm standing in for the ranking member of the subcommittee, and it's always a privilege to be able to do that. From your comments, Mr. Chairman, it appears as though you are opposed to the continued funding for the high-speed rail and would like to see it stop. If that is the case, this hearing is going to be extremely important. Unfortunately, Mr. Scoville's testimony will be of really no value at this point because he's had less than 4 months to develop his report. So we're going to go forward. I'm looking forward to the testimony from the witnesses here. I think it's going to be extremely important. I also want to recognize my colleagues, all of whom, well, with the exception of Ms. Lofgren, who were in the legislature and were deeply involved in this program during its inception and its early years. There are a couple of things I think we need to be aware of here. And first of all, hopefully this will be a productive conversation. But I do think it's important to look at the history of federal funding for this project. And it does, as you said, Mr. Chairman, stem from the Great Recession of 2008 and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which appropriated $2.55 billion for the Central Valley portion of the project. At that time, California's unemployment rate was 12.2% compared to 4.5% today. While the state struggled with the economic downturn, the Central Valley suffered even more. In 2010, Stanislaus County had an 18.3% unemployment rate, and Merced County was close to 21%. As Mr. Hunter will testify in his testimony, the planning and construction of the project in the Central Valley helped to bring this 18% unemployment rate in Stanislaus County down to 7%, where it stands today. This was brought through the direct employment of over 2,000 skilled trade workers and $2 billion in economic activity in the valley. At the same time, the authority has contracted with roughly 500 companies in the Central Valley, in Stanislaus, Merced, Fresno counties in the area, to supply equipment, components, and other necessities for this project, helping to grow the existing economy. Once the Silicon Valley to the Central Valley component is complete, nearly $50 billion in economic activity will be brought to the Central Valley alone. The completion of the valley-to-valley segment would provide an important connection between these two distant communities, providing economic and social benefits to both areas. I also want to thank the High-Speed Rail Authority, namely the chair of the board, Dan Richards, for helping ensure that this project is an American-made project so that our tax dollars are spent promoting American jobs and industries. The authority originally requested a Buy America waiver that would have allowed up to 70 train sets to use foreign components and foreign-sourced steel. When I called Mr. Richards about this issue, he immediately pulled their waiver request and committed to make it in America. I want to thank the authority for their quick response and commitment to promoting good American manufacturing jobs. While I'm excited about the economic impacts of this project to date, like you, Mr. Chairman, I do have many questions about how the authority plans to fund the remainder of the project, and in a way that is both responsible to the taxpayers and potential future riders. I do appreciate Mr. Thompson's testimony on behalf of the peer review group. Look forward to hearing him say and to develop where do we go from here. We'll have that testimony in a few moments. In closing, while recognizing there are many challenges that will be highlighted already by you, Mr. Chairman, I would like to note that we've been here before. California didn't become the world's fifth largest economy by chance. We accomplished this by investing in our state, investing in its infrastructure, in its agriculture, in its water systems, in its universities, and in its research and educational systems. The same project that made the city of Los Angeles possible, the water system, has now made it the second most populous city in the nation. We build airports, we build roads, and if we are able to maintain the tax, that is the excise tax on the fuel, we will continue to build our transportation systems. I note that some, perhaps even sitting at this table, are opposed to that, and that's a question for the ballot in November. Well, we got things to do, we got places to go, we need people that are willing to build it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses here today. Our panel is comprised of Inspector General Cal Scoville, the United States Department of Transportation, Mr. Brian Kelly, CEO of California High-Speed Rail Authority, Lou Thompson, Chairman of the California High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group, and Mr. Robbie Hunter, President of the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California. I ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Since your testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. We'll begin now with Mr. Scoville. Welcome to the committee. You may proceed.
Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Garamendi, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify on the Federal Railroad Administration's oversight of the high-speed intercity passenger rail program. Since 2009, Congress has appropriated over $10 billion for this program, and almost 39% of that has gone to the planned high-speed rail corridor here in California. Since 2012, my office has completed 7 audits related to FRA's oversight of the high-speed rail program, and we have additional reviews ongoing. To date, we have issued 21 recommendations to FRA about its high-speed rail program oversight, and the agency has completed action on 20 of them. Today, I will describe steps FRA has taken to address our published recommendations. I will then update you on the status of our ongoing audit, which is focused on FRA's oversight of its grants to the California High-Speed Rail Authority. As our work shows, FRA faced challenges in implementing and overseeing high-speed rail in the 10 years since the program was created. On the implementation side, these challenges included developing a coherent nationwide plan for high-speed rail, as well as communicating guidance to help states, including California, plan and implement their projects. In response to our recommendations, FRA undertook a national rail planning effort that defined measurable performance goals and clear stakeholder roles. It also improved some of its project planning materials. For example, FRA developed guidance to improve how grantees forecast ridership and revenue and estimate the costs and benefits of planned projects. This guidance can inform California as it develops future business plans and other supporting plans for high-speed rail. FRA also faced numerous challenges relating to grant management and oversight. Along with quickly establishing a new grant program, FRA had to distribute and oversee more than $10 billion in federal funds, including the $3.5 billion it granted to California. To its credit, FRA has addressed certain weaknesses we identified with its grant program, such as those related to amending and monitoring grant agreements. California's FRA grant has been amended 6 times. For example, a 2012 amendment allowed the state to expend federal funds before it paid state matching funds. While grant amendments occur for a variety of legitimate reasons, FRA has a responsibility to ensure that they do not result in unacceptable risk to federal investments. In response to our recommendations, FRA updated its guidance on mitigating risks during the grant amendment process. In addition, FRA now requires its staff to report suspected fraud, waste, and abuse to our office for investigation. FRA also updated its web-based project management tracking tool and amended its procedures for following up on problems it identifies during grant monitoring. If applied consistently, this can be a useful tool. FRA's steps in these areas are commendable. However, to protect federal funds, management attention and strong oversight remain critical. Our ongoing work continues to assess FRA's grant oversight to identify additional areas for improvement. In particular, at your request, Mr. Chairman, we recently started an audit of FRA's oversight of its grants to the California High-Speed Rail Project. We will assess FRA's risk analysis, assessment, and mitigation efforts, as well as its procedures for overseeing the expended federal funds. To meet these objectives, we are currently reviewing those expenditures, including invoices submitted to FRA by the authority to determine whether federal funds expended complied with applicable federal laws and regulations. We are also interviewing FRA staff and examining other grant documentation, all with the goal of evaluating FRA's analysis of risks that may be associated with the California High-Speed Rail Initiative. Because our audit is still in its initial phase, we are not yet able to report on any preliminary findings in accordance with federal auditing standards. However, as our audit progresses, we will brief FRA on our findings and reach out to other stakeholders, including the Rail Authority, as needed, to validate and discuss our results. We plan to issue our report in late spring 2019. We are committed to working with FRA to improve its oversight and stewardship of federal funds, and we will keep you apprised of this and any other related work. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I will be happy to answer questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Scoville. Mr. Kelly, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Also, good morning, Acting Ranking Member Garamendi and other members of the committee. My name is Brian Kelly, and I'm the CEO.
Mr. Kelly, can I have you pull the microphone up
Sure.
a little bit closer?
Sure. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Brian Kelly. I'm the CEO of the California High-Speed Rail Authority, a position I was appointed to in February of this year. Prior to this position, just by way of background, I served as Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency for 5 years, and prior to that, spent 18 years working in the California State Senate, where I got to know many of you. Good to see you again, and welcome back to Sacramento. I was drawn to the high-speed rail program because, in my view, it's the most transformative project I've seen in 24 years of working in transportation policy in the state. It's capable of delivering very important mobility, economic, and environmental objectives. In my first 6 months on the job, I've immediately set to work developing our guiding documents to get this project on the track for success, including the adoption of the business plan, which we'll go into greater detail today. We've also adopted program baseline, which is a multi-year document to guide our work to implement the 2018 business plan, and includes a definition of scope, schedule, and cost for early investments. We are completing work now on a program management plan, which is a reorganization of our our organization to assure we have resources in the right place and addressing our challenges that are before us to deliver this project on time. And then finally, we'll be taking up a new strategic plan, which will lay out how we'll achieve our mission, vision, and goals, and through measurable performance metrics that we will use to provide project update reports to all of our oversight committees, this one as well as legislative. In addition to these organizational improvements, it's worth noting that the authority has made important progress in the project since this subcommittee's last field hearing. We have 3 construction packages that have advanced to create an overall investment of over $3 billion on construction-related activities in the Central Valley. Bridges, viaducts, grade separations are becoming clearly visible at multiple locations, and we have 20 major projects underway today. We have dispatched more than 2,000 workers that have good-paying jobs on the project, and as was noted earlier, we're employing over 437 small businesses, including 142 disadvantaged businesses and 52 disabled veteran businesses. We did meet the R expenditure deadline of September 2017 in our FRA grant agreement, and the authority is now accessing Proposition 1A bonds for construction, while our cap-and-trade dollars appear to have stabilized. With this great progress, however, the project does face challenges, and our 2018 business plan laid out a vision to implement this project in the face of these challenges, which are not dissimilar to those that confront projects around the world of similar magnitude and complexity. For the first time in this plan, the authority is assigning costs to risks that were identified in prior plans, and we present a baseline cost estimate for all project sections. Also, for the first time, the plan discontinues the past practice of estimating project costs with a specific dollar estimate, and instead, recognizing that many elements of the project are still in the early project development phase, the plan estimates costs utilizing baseline estimates and ranges. Our baseline estimate for Valley to Valley is $29.5 billion. Our baseline estimate for the entirety of Phase 1 is $77.3 billion. The revised baseline cost estimates show an increase in costs largely driven by the effects of inflation, increased contingency for risks, and previously identified construction delays in the Central Valley. The schedule for the Valley to Valley service and our full Phase 1 service are pushed out 4 years respectively, and the schedules will be affected primarily by the timing and availability of funding for project implementation. The plan also outlines a financing strategy consistent with the one contained in the 2016 business plan to better align our cap-and-trade funds with the capital needs for the project so we can deliver the benefits at the earliest possible time. Our strategic investment priorities in the plan include 5 priorities. 1, meet all of our commitments to our federal funding partner under our grant agreement. 2, extend the Valley to Valley service from San Francisco to Bakersfield, which is the highest revenue, highest ridership initial service. Deliver in the short term 224 miles of high-speed rail-ready infrastructure for use by 2027. Isolate the tunneling in the Pacheco Pass as the final missing link to complete the Valley to Valley service, and continue our bookend investments in Southern and Northern California. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to conclude by reiterating my perspective that this transformative project is unique in its ability to provide vital mobility, economic, and environmental benefits to Californians. And with that, Mr. Chairman and members, I'm happy to answer your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Thompson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Denneman and Ranking Member Garamendi, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. As you know, I'm the chairman of the peer review group. This was a group created by the legislation, Proposition 1A, to report to the legislature on issues on business plans or anything else that we see in the project that we believe the legislature will find interesting. We have written a number of letters to the legislature, and I've testified a number of times before the legislature on various issues on this project. I can summarize my testimony here today by saying that it is surprisingly similar to what I said 2013 before this subcommittee in Madeira. We think that the bottom line on this project now consists of a number of points. One is building and operating high-speed rail in California is typical of a mega project, and indeed, Mr. DeSaulnier held hearings on mega projects and why are they so hard, and we had a long colloquy about that issue. We believe that the authority has made real progress in establishing a capable and experienced management team, but that team has a golden bear by the tail. There is nothing in the experience to date that is atypical of a project of this size. Certainly when the grand visions meet reality, all kinds of things happen, and costs are usually higher than we expected. Things take longer, and problems that we never thought about emerge. And this is exactly what you would expect on this kind of project. The experience to date has been with the typical kind of civil construction, which is almost a highway project thus far. And so what we are learning to date about that, we will be able to apply to this kind of construction in the future, where those lessons are beginning to be applied. Many aspects of the project, especially track construction, electrification, signaling, and especially tunneling, haven't been encountered yet. So the cost estimates for that have to be viewed as having a pretty wide range of outcomes. Not necessarily bad, not necessarily good, but a wide range that we're going to have to deal with for the time being. The demand forecast, although they have been done by professional demand forecasters, are not related to an existing ridership base. They're based on economic modeling. Greenfield models, they're called, where it's brand new. Like these are inherently subject to a wider range of uncertainty than brownfield models where I already have service, and the question is how much will the demand increase if I improve the service? Very different. All of the other high-speed rail projects have been constructed with existing service to go from. As a result, the forecasts of the revenues and the cost are also, as of now, subject to pretty wide ranges of outcomes. Having acknowledged all of this, the key problem for the authority and the project is having a stable and reliable policy and financing framework. And they don't have that now, and it will not be possible to manage this project in the future properly without having that stable funding, adequate funding, and policy framework. They are now encountering the kind of commitments that they need to make and the kind of decisions that need to be made that can only be made when there is certainty to work with. It just isn't fair to ask the project to be managed without that framework now. This is an issue that came up in 2013, and I think Mr. Costa at that time was not happy with my answer, which was you've got to have a better financing framework than you have now. Having said all of this, this concludes what I want to say today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Hunter, welcome. You may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Garamendi, and committee members of Congress. My name's Robbie Hunter. I'm the president of the State Building Construction Trades Council. I'm an iron worker by trade, and I worked for almost 30 years in Los Angeles on bridges and highways. So I'm a tradesman. I represent workers that work in construction. This project, as of this time, we have over 2,000 workers working for private contractors throughout the project. These contractors are union and non-union. We represent 400,000 workers, 48,000 of them are apprentices. We have taken in many veterans, and Congressman Denham has been a large supporter in ensuring that we live up to the obligation to put veterans to work and put disadvantaged workers from the Valley in these projects, in the apprenticeship, and assure that local workers on those job sites. We have worked diligently to do so. The workers we represent do work for private contractors. They contribute a portion of their wages for their medical coverage and pension to assure in their older years that they are not a burden to the federal or state government. You know, we have built the infrastructure of California for over 100 years. We worked on the viaducts. We have worked out of state to do the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge, and we are used to controversy on these projects. But we try to put our heads down and to deliver projects using the least amount of people, do it in the least amount of time, do it once and do it right, and that's our obligation, and we have fulfilled it on this project and intend to do the same. I've been all over the country, all over the world, looking at projects to see how they're done, from hydro dams to power plants. We've looked at the use of high-speed rail in Spain, in many other countries in Germany, and I've sat on high-speed rail passing the Autobahn, trucks 130 miles an hour, and we pass them like it's sitting still, and there's a glass of water on the table, it barely moves. This is the infrastructure of tomorrow for the move, the growing population of 50 million. It also will economically, we believe, will open the valley, make it we are in danger of losing large industries like Microsoft and others that are based technology industries that are drivers of our economy. If we cannot provide housing for the workforce and access them to get to those jobs, we could lose these industries, lose our economy, and we are the 5th largest in the economy in the world. This is a necessity for the economic future of California. I am open to answer any questions. I've submitted testimony, which I'm not going to read. I'm going to take the advice of the chair, but I'd be glad to answer any questions. And I want to thank everyone on this committee for support of workers, no matter what party you come from, because you all have done that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hunter, and I do agree. You guys have done what you said you were going to do and hire veterans and hire locally. It is an important part of what we're discussing today. Let me start questions here. I want to drill down on this before we get into the audit itself and talk a little bit about the project, because I agree with Mr. Kelly that high-speed rail, when done right, is transformative. It is transformative to a state, to a country. It is a great people mover, but it also frees up capacity on our roads as well as for our freight rail. But as a leader in this community, it's my obligation to make sure that this is done right, especially since I make no secret about it. I was the deciding vote in the state Senate back before this went before the voters. But it was a $33 billion project that's supposed to be done 2 years from now. So it has obviously drastically changed, and the question is, where do we go from here? What will this audit show? Where will the financing come from? With a battle on the ballot this year with the current gas tax, would we take the peer review recommendation to do another gas tax in the future for this as well? And so there are a lot of questions here, not only on the funding that has been allocated through the stimulus funds or the appropriations bill in 2010, but also on the $9.95 billion that's been expended so far, and the path forward. So let me start, Mr. Kelly. When the voters approved Prop 1A, when the project was going to be completed in 2020, the 2020, that was a full high-speed rail service from San Francisco to LA, correct? It's originally supposed to be 2020?
Yep. I don't recall the date, but I will say that, yeah, Phase 1 is San Francisco to Los Angeles.
And now the plan has projections of Phase 1 to be completed by 2033,
That's correct.
but not to include this area of Sacramento or San Diego as originally proposed in Prop 1A.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, the San Diego extension and the Sacramento extension were always Phase 2. The bond bill itself lays out the phases under which we have to deliver the program. And Phase 1 has always just been the San Francisco to Los Angeles stretch. Phase 2 includes extension through the Inland Empire from LA to San Diego and an extension up the valley to Sacramento as part of Phase 2 program.
I've not seen in the current plan any cost projections or timelines on Phase 2. Do you have those projections?
No, because we are first focused, as we are required to under the bond bill, to deliver Phase 1. And our requirements under the law for the business plan is to lay out how we're going to deliver the project under the bond bill. And it's Phase 1 is our emphasis now.
I understand the emphasis, but as you can understand, the voters in my district approved something that they would like to see something in the future. We're talking about a generation away now of new voters, and so it is a relevant question. Will it be high speed from San Francisco to LA? That is one of the things that continues to be debated.
Yeah, the system will provide huge mobility benefits, especially when you consider versus conventional rail or driving a vehicle. And you can only achieve that because of the speeds that we attain through the system. Just like high-speed rail systems in other parts of the world, where we are going through urban areas, we are on shared corridors. This is the Silicon Valley area connecting Gilroy North to San Francisco. And in Los Angeles, for efficiency purposes, to reduce right-of-way procurement requirements, we are in a shared corridor down there with Metrolink, Losan, and the freights. And in those sections, we will operate at lower speeds, but in between will be at speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour. And we are on track to meet the schedules under the bond bill, which is, I must say, the requirements under the bond bill are the guidelines that we use for our design and our choices to go forward.
I'm about out of time, but I do want to get one additional question on this first round. What is the reason for the current delays in completion, and where do you plan to come up with the additional funding under the 2018 plan?
Well, the reasons of delay we've laid out in our business plan. I would commend folks to take a look at Chapter 4. We have some. We spent a lot of time on some lessons learned, and I would say
quickly. Is it labor? Has labor been a holdup?
No.
No. How about CEQA? Has CEQA been a holdup? Or environmental review? Are we done with the environmental review yet?
We are not done with environmental review yet, and we have, particularly since I've come here with my new team, we are proposing some things with our federal partners to expedite that process. So we're hoping to achieve that. I would just say that, Mr. Chairman, I think one of the things that we pointed out in the business plan that led to some of the delays now are we had some requirements to quickly spend the federal dollars that were appropriated for the project. We got into construction before we had all the right-of-way and third-party agreements done and in hand. And that process, that's not something we will repeat. And I
understand, but this is part of the thing that I'm taking back to Washington, D.C. to explain to not only our other members on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, but Congress as a whole. The question the other 49 states ask us when we're talking about funding and whether or not we have more federal funding is, what are you doing yourselves?
Yeah.
And if this state and this governor continues to waive CEQA for a new football stadium in L.A., or the previous one that was proposed, or AT&T Park, and yet we've still not, it has been a decade now, and we're still not through the environmental process of this first one. I'm not saying CEQA needs to be waived, but there are certainly some streamlining that could be done if this was a real priority. So as we're looking at saving dollars and we're looking at timelines, the rest of the country is asking, what are you doing yourselves? Well, I'm out of time, but I'd love to get back to you on that. I now recognize Mr. Garamendi for 5 minutes.
The chairman just asked a question. I think you should answer it.
Okay. A couple of things. On the CEQA issue, this is one area where we seem to have some concurrence with the current administration at the federal level. We have been working for the last 8 months to get an agreement where we can assign the NEPA responsibilities to the state of California for moving forward on the environmental process. That has been done only on the highway side in this country. It started in California and it has now been done in 5 or 6 other states, and they have saved months and millions of dollars in the process of environmental. So we would be setting a precedent here in California by applying that to the railroad side. That's a request that we have before the administration now, and we're just waiting for the approval of that. We think that will also save months and time and money on this project. So that's one thing we're doing. The second thing I'd just say we're doing in terms of self-help for this project is about 86% being funded by state funds right now. So we are fully invested in moving forward on this project from the state of California's perspective between our bond dollars and our cap and trade funds.
I thank you. I have a lot of questions. I'm going to take the rest of my time at the end of the questions by my colleagues, all of whom were involved in this project in the California legislature, have a long history in it. So I'd like to turn the remaining, if it's okay with the chair, just hold my remaining 3 minutes to the end and move to Mr. Lowenthal, who was on the committee and has dealt with this issue in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing.
Are you yielding your time, Mr. Lowenthal, or are we
Start over.
I'm going to start, and he's going to be at the end. The first shall be last, the last shall be first.
all good friends here, just technical time management.
I'm
Give him
just
5 minutes.
following, trying to figure out how I fit in. You know, I'm really pleased to be here. I don't know if this, I served as the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee in the California State Legislature. I served 14 years in the legislature. From the end of 2005 through 2010, I served. I was the chair when, as Mr. Denham pointed out, we put it out of the committee, the bond issue. Came before the voters in 2010, 2008, and subsequent, and following that, Mr. Bauer, Art Bauer, who was on the staff of the Senate Transportation Committee, we held multiple hearings on the bill. So the questions I have, and I had even all along as a supporter of the project, helped to get the project out, is the financing. As I understand, let me just be clear, as I understand now, when I left in 2012, the state was putting up $9.95 billion. That was in the state bond of the approximately $9 billion for the high-speed rail. Then there was some money for the bookends and the others out of that. The federal government was putting up a little over $3 billion. I heard today $3.875 billion. So the state, as Mr. Kelly has pointed out, really was putting up the vast majority. Now, I know of no high-speed rail project in the world that the federal government in that country was not a major proponent of it. So, but right now we only have a small percentage. And as I understood at that point when we passed it, that it was the idea that the federal government would put up a little bit, maybe around a third, the state would put up around a third, and the private sector. So my questions are, where are we in all of that moving forward? Cap and trade, the only new money coming in is the cap and trade. Could you tell us, Mr. Kelly, how much money is actually coming in from cap and trade? How much do we anticipate to come in from cap and trade? I'd like to know, where is the private sector in doing this? We had hoped by this time when we had done it that we would see more of an investment from the private sector. I'm not hearing any money coming in from the private sector. And what do you anticipate you need from the federal government, really, in terms of real money? It just seems to me a $3.875 billion investment on a $77 billion project is not going to make it. And so I'd like to know, really, because to me it's all about following the money where we are. I think you've done a great job, as was pointed out. You know, you can't be held, you know, you're working on that, but there is no money. Tell me where we're going with the money.
Thank you, Congressman. A couple of points I'd make. First, you're hitting on something that has been the single most important challenge of this project from day one. When the voters of California passed the bond bill, they provided $9 billion for what in that ballot analysis described as a $45 billion project,
Right.
which means they provided 1/5 of the funding for the project from day one. That has been the challenge ever since. We had in 2008, $9 billion. In 2010, we were up to about 12. Today, with cap and trade, we're at about 21 or 22. The issue with cap and trade, as you well know, is that it is not a firm, it's an auction-based revenue source, so it comes in highs and lows. With the passage of legislation last year to lock that program down for 10 years, we've seen stabilized cap and trade revenue.
So when you
We're
go back
estimating about $750 million a year coming in from
Okay.
cap and trade for this project.
Okay.
That puts us at about $22 billion, $22 billion for the project.
in 10 years.
Over the course of the cap and trade dollars, just from what we have in the law today, available for this project. And what we are doing is, because we are in that constrained funding environment, our business plan lays out building exactly what was approved in Proposition 1A, but doing it in a building block way. I don't have all the money right now to do everything, so I have to do it in parts. We are under construction in a 119-mile segment in the Central Valley. Our highest priority is to complete that, get our environmental work done statewide on all the segments, and it's worth noting for the panel that we have 10 segments and 8 of them are still in environmental. And so we have to complete the environmental process. We need the help of getting the NEPA assignment so we can move that more quickly. And so that is where we are. We are estimating a funding gap to complete all of Valley to Valley of about $7 to $10 billion, or, as the chairman stated earlier, roughly the cost of the tunneling through the Pacheco Pass. Our plan is to focus on is to build on both sides of the tunnel, get the Central Valley piece in place, extend the San Jose to San Francisco electrified project all the way to Gilroy, and see if we can start services there while we focus on the unfunded tunnel part. We are bringing in international expertise on that. These kind of tunnels are built all over the world, but not a lot here for high-speed rail. We're bringing in international expertise on that and private sector partners to sort of figure out, can we do any private sector or procurement opportunities with that tunneling exercise there. So that is our process going forward. On the private sector money, I would just say this. In any transportation project, for the private sector to come in generally, they want low-risk projects. Right now, with an unconstrained funding program, with a constrained funding program, we're not low risk, and we're still in environmental. So we have to get these things done. Our process all along has been get our operating segment going, show that we can produce revenue, and then use as a concessionaire that model so we can then bring in private money.
If you could just just let me know,
Sure.
just an overview then, of the 12 to, a little under $13 billion that was both federal and state.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is left, and where are we? You're saying that there's a little bit, 750 million, was that annually?
That's our annual cap and trade estimate.
So that's coming in.
Yeah.
That's 750 million.
Yeah.
How much money do we have left in the bank?
Of the federal and state money that we have received, we have only spent to date approximately $4.5 billion, on the order of $4.6 billion. That's what's been spent to date. And that's not just in the Central Valley, that's also for environmental work and other things. We've spent just under $4 billion in the Central Valley, I believe, to date, where you're seeing the most construction activity right now. So we have that difference plus the cap and trade funding. As I said, if we've spent about 4.6, we have an estimate of about 22 available. So there's 18 unspent. But again, that is
That's
it's
anticipated
an assumption
money.
the cap and trade money continues.
That is
Right.
not cash you're
No, it's not.
anticipating.
That's correct. And because that's what we have. We have a multi-year commitment of cap and trade funds, and that's what we have to assume for planning purposes. We do think that the approval of AB 398 last year that locked in cap and trade for 10 years has had a real stabilizing effect on the cap and trade program. And we've seen that in the auctions, the last 4 auctions that have been conducted since then. So because we're in that constrained environment, that constrained funding environment, we have proposed in the business plan to get to the 1A program first by getting to valley, and even doing that in segments. And the first segment is a Central Valley piece, Bakersfield North. On the west side of the tunnel, we want to extend the San Francisco to San Jose electrification all the way to Gilroy, and we want to focus the unfunded part on the tunnels in the middle and work with industry, the federal government, and others on trying to get a financing solution for the tunnels to complete valley to valley. So that is our fundamental, program right now that we laid out in the business plan in terms of how we move forward. I should also say we continue to make bookend investments all over the state. We are funding partners on a major grade separation in Los Angeles, and in this business plan, we are proposing to be funding partners for the rebuild of the LA Union Station, which will both accommodate Metrolink, Losan, other lines down there, and ultimately accommodate high-speed rail.
Mr. Lowenthal, you've now taken up your 5 minutes and Garamendi's 3.
And you're too.
And it was worth every second.
I now recognize Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hearing today and the opportunity to get this out in front of the people of California and as well as the federal taxpayers. Mr. Scoville, one of my colleagues was a little tough on you earlier about the 4 months of experience there. I note that Mr. Kelly has 6 months on the job, so I guess that additional 2 months is the amount of time needed to reach total rail consciousness. And so you got that going for you, which is nice. So anyway, Mr. Scoville, I'd like to come to you and take a chance on that experience you have there. And one of my major issues is wondering about the funding. We'll set aside ridership. We'll set aside all the other benefits we've heard about. Let's talk about the funding here. So we can identify $13 billion from the initial bond and about $3 billion from federal funding from ERA. And so the only thing to add to that since this has all come about, when the first funding was put out, I think it was in 2012, and three of us were in the state senate, and all three of us voted no on that original round of funding in a bipartisan way. So the issue is 13 billion of identified money, then the rest is going to have to come from somewhere else. The private market out there, which was staying away in droves. And then the cap and trade scheme that has been put together in California, which the number was identified as $750 million per year on an optimistic cap and trade year. Is that what percentage is that of the total cap and trade take? But then how do you see that financing the shortfall of, under the optimistic plan, when it was downsized from the $98.5 billion number we heard in November of 2011 in a local transportation committee. It jumped from the 33 to the 43 to the 98.5. Then it was downsized to 68 a few months later when Governor Brown chose to use local rail in LA and San Francisco, which probably isn't legal under the bond. So we're at least $55 billion short, $87 billion short by the realistic number of $100 billion rail system. So at $750 million of additional funding, with none likely to come from the federal government, and no new bonds seemingly on the horizon in Sacramento to try and throw in more for that, since we have other bonds we're working on, where are we going to get this funding?
Thanks,
At
Mr. LaMalfa.
$750 million a year. Pardon, go ahead.
Right. Thank you. The gap that you've described between projected funding and projected costs is exactly the kind of risk that FRA has to analyze. It's FRA's job at the federal level right now to protect the federal investments. Right now, it's about $3.5 billion total. $2.5 billion has actually been spent. That was the ERA money. There's about $928 million more that's hanging in the balance. It's contingent on the Rail Authority making good on its matching requirement for that original ERA money. Setting all of that aside, as FRA goes forward and tries to analyze the risks that the Rail Authority is facing and the risks that there may not be an adequate match from the state for the federal dollar, or that the other two aspects of the 2016 amendment may not be satisfied by the Rail Authority. And those 3 points are the total at this time of FRA's kind of skin in the game.
What is the danger that the state rail authority is not meeting the obligations that the federal requirements are for that money, and that it may even have to come around and refund that, if not, providing the match that it's supposed to do, or meeting the obligations that are set forth the bond for a true high-speed rail train, and the federal guidelines that go with that? What's the danger of that?
Well, as we see the numbers, we see the Rail Authority having made good on about $293 million of making good on the match so far. They've advanced
293 out of the $3 billion plus?
293 of the $2.5 billion.
Yeah, about, okay.
Right.
Okay.
They've advanced that as proof of their match. They've up through the end of FY17. Currently, as we understand it, the latest numbers that we've been provided are $644 million more advanced by the Rail Authority to FRA as further evidence of their making the match. FRA's
So
job,
total match so far is around 900 million that they've made?
yes, right,
And how much have they spent of federal money so far?
$2.5 billion.
Yeah.
There's a gap
that
there.
There's that number. And
But
then
they
at
do
what-
have until the end of 2022.
End of 2022 to make good on that
Yes, sir.
by matching that spending.
Right. So, progress made, challenges remain. That's always the Inspector General's eternal refrain, I think. We'll
you.
have to see how it plays out.
Mr. Kelly, does $750 million a year even make the interest payments on the bonds?
They won't be used for that purpose.
No, but would it match that number?
I don't know. The prop one, I don't know. I'm not sure. Sitting here, Mr. LaMalfa, I'm not sure what the bond payment is right now on the bond in terms of the annual debt service.
On the 9.95 billion once
On
it's
the
all
nine,
spent?
yeah, because that debt service.
I'm just wondering if it'll make if that
That
would
debt
be-
service is not paid out of our revenues. our
Certainly,
revenue.
someone else's revenues, okay.
The general
Well,
obligation.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back with only a little overtime and look forward to the next round, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little odd for me to be on this side of the table with you two, but I do remember a time when I was a Republican many years ago. Actually, I think you should change. Anyways, we'll do rock, scissors, paper. I just want to, two things to begin with. First of all, sometimes my criticism has been confused with my support for the project. California, more than ever, needs a world-class passenger rail system. The only thing that's changed since I was in the legislature and Lou and I were having those discussions is that there's a greater urgency for California to get a world-class passenger rail system. Congestion, as Mr. Kelly knows, up 300% in the urban areas in California. We desperately need, and the rail systems, commuter systems and the transit systems, the inner cities systems are struggling. They're struggling with fare box recovery, reliability, and safety. So I really think that there's an opportunity here to fix this project, and I think much of the wisdom is encapsulated in Mr. Thompson's 3 or 4 pages within the business plan and in his testimony as he's submitted here, and how much respect I have for all 4 of you, but for 3 of you, I know you very, very well. Mr. Hunter, the job you're doing is exemplary for unions all over this country and the American workforce. The training you give them, the value that you give your customers, your contractors. And like you, I've been around the world to talk about this project with public officials as high as ministers of transportation in Japan and Germany and in Paris. Been Spain, Italy, Germany, Japan, which has the best system in the world, if you ask me, and the Chinese, who gave me a really good demonstration of their work, particularly at the Hong Kong station, which I've never seen. This was not on public dollars. So the one thing I will say in all of those conversations, it would be kind to say that the international community looks at this project skeptically, particularly the revenue. So first with Brian, the respect I have for you for years that I've known you when I was on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission through the legislature, your capacity not just for expertise but your ethics. Your predecessor was not happy with me when in the legislature I questioned him about his honesty on this project because, quite frankly, I thought he misled me. And so I worked on legislation to get rid of the authority because I thought they needed to go. One of the reasons I didn't pursue that was because the administration agreed to put the authority under the Transportation Administration, of which you were the secretary. So you have been able to work with elected officials and appointed officials and still be a truth teller. Sometimes we didn't like your truth, but you're in a unique position to change this project and make it successful. However, my suspicion is you now are not on top of the organization, you are working for the authority. So I'd like your commitment here that if you see things, and I think you have done this in your 6 months, where the authority is doing things that are not in the best interest of the state, will you continue to tell them that and at this point in your career, make sure that your reputation for ethics and honesty continues?
I mean, yeah, because I approach this, I think it's worth just stating that I approach this as, when I was the secretary and we did work on other big projects like the Bay Bridge and there is nothing better.
Why did you bring up the Bay Bridge?
Well, because I just wanted, there's nothing better than we established some processes on that project that required the transparency, and it's the only way. There's only public dollars on this project right now.
Okay.
I am for the transparency. It's a benefit for all of us, and it's going to help us manage this project.
Brian, and I only bring that up, it's in dead seriousness because you are the person who can save this. Mr. Thompson, the last time you testified in front of me up the street, I asked you whether the project could make the 2 hours, the commitment to the voters, and you said publicly no. Could you tell me now, 5 years later, what you think the time could be from the Transbay Terminal to Union Station?
Well, I think the answer is the schedule that they're showing in the 2018 business plan is around 3 hours and 10 or 11 minutes. Could you crank up a train at midnight with nothing else on the railway and nobody in your way and run it without stopping from San Francisco to LA in 2:40? barely.
So how does that affect the business plan, the modeling? We're competing with airlines. That was a key part, is making that faster time.
The critical question that we raised about that is, do your demand models reflect 3 hours and 10 minutes? And the answer is yes, they do. So the demand models are consistent with the schedule that they're proposing to operate. And that means that to the extent that the demand models are accurate for other reasons, that they certainly are consistent with that. But the 240 would be very, very dicey.
And just if you indulge me one more second, the last question, Brian, is we've talked about this. The international community, its revenue model is different from what we have on many levels, but value capture, and I see Ms. Rooney in the audience, the JR lines get a third of their operating cost from value capture. I think we have a great opportunity to do that from San Jose out to Bakersfield. What are you finding?
Yeah, we do. I mean, our in a couple of areas. One, there may be utilization of our assets for fiber cables and other things that you can generate revenue for, but more importantly, around our station development is where I think not only can you build the stations with the community, serving the communities that people want, but you can also build around those stations and part of those stations to maximize revenue for the system. And that's the essence of the value capture for us. And I think there's a way to do it where you're also achieving many other important mobility and environmental objectives. And so
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me. Just as a point of reference, the area around the Transbay Terminal will generate an extra $8 billion in property tax to the city and county of San Francisco. If we use the Japanese and the European model, a third of that was going into the operations system.
Thank you, Mr. DeSaulnier. I'm not as convinced that the one around Shafter will have the same economic development.
We can get some real high density in there, so you can go to the Planning Commission meetings for that.
I now recognize Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes as well.
Well, thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to participate in this hearing, since I'm not a member of the committee, but I am one of the co-chairs of the California High-Speed Rail Caucus in Congress, along with Representative Costa and Correa. You know, as I've listened to this, I think this oversight is important. Transparency, obviously, is necessary. But I'm mindful that it's hard to do big things, and it's easy to criticize. When I was in local government, I never served in the legislature. I led the successful half-cent sales tax that voters approved to build highways. And, you know, building things is tough. And I think this is the largest construction project underway, really, in the United States. It's the biggest thing going in the United States. So I think it's important to have that perspective if you are going to do big things. And certainly, we've got these projects underway all over the world. I mean, it seems to me if Uzbekistan can build a high-speed rail system, so should we be able to do so. Now, looking at some of the issues from my perspective, I represent San Jose. The impact of high-speed rail connection between the Silicon Valley and the Central Valley is something that we think might be considerably important to both valleys. Right now, the median price of a house in San Jose is over $1 million. The unemployment rate in San Jose is under 2%. People can't find employees. And if you go to the Central Valley, you've got housing that's very affordable and a high unemployment rate and plenty of smart people who would like to get those great jobs in the Silicon Valley. So I'm advised, and I guess this question goes to you, Mr. Kelly, that with this project, that we would be able to get to from Fresno to San Jose in about an hour. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. Between an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah.
I'll just point out right now it takes, I have someone on my staff who works in New Almaden in San Jose. It can take her longer than that to get from San Jose to downtown. So this will completely change the housing and the employment opportunities for a significant part of the state. I would just note that we have to identify a source of funds, and Mr. DeSaulnay and I have discussed this often, the need to see how we might enhance revenue around stations. But at the Diridon station, Google has already announced a project for 25,000 employees right within walking distance of the station itself. And the other technology companies are also starting. So there is going to be some opportunity for some public-private partnership, it seems to me. And I just wanted to mention, Mr. Thompson, in terms of the grade separation, there's this entire line from San Jose to San Francisco is going to be grade separated, we believe. I mean, the voters of Santa Clara County tax themselves to provide funding that's not from the authority to do the grade separations in all of Santa Clara County. So there shouldn't be delay from traffic, at least in any of the Santa Clara County portions of the project. But Mr. Kelly, does your business plan take a look at the technology growth and incorporate those possibilities for as revenue sources?
We're a little bit at the front end of the station area planning exercise. We have laid out grant awards with cities to move forward on that. We have just become a partner with Caltrain, VTA, City of San Jose, and I think BART to work on the Diridon station planning
Right.
exercise, which is again just gotten underway, but we are a full partner in that exercise. Our stations will vary from place to place because in some we'll be the primary owner of the structure, and others we will not be. Diridon's an example where we are not. We're a tenant, but there's great opportunity for how that is developed, what that looks like, and how you develop around there to enhance the system, revenues for the system, and provide great opportunity for people to get around without having to drive too far.
Final question. When I led the traffic authority and we built the highways, we did do a combined NEPA CEQA.
Yes.
And there were no corners cut. I mean, everything was done, but it was done in a combined fashion.
Yes.
It really makes a lot of sense. So anything we could do to help that, I think, would be very important to get this done properly. And I personally would like to assist in any way that I could on that matter.
Appreciate that. To date, we've been working very closely with the FRA to move forward on that NEPA CEQA assignment. It's pending, and we're eager to get it so we can try to achieve the savings we've seen on the highway side.
I'll just close by saying, you know, we have one company alone in Silicon Valley with a market cap of $1 trillion. It seems to me that as a society, we should be able to solve this financial problem.
May I respond briefly to one thing you said? I wish there were a coordinated program to get rid of the grade crossings between San Jose and San Francisco, but there is not. And one of the things that we have recommended repeatedly is that such a program of state and local and high-speed rail and Caltrain and other money be developed to get rid of those grade crossings. They kill 20 people a year on those grade crossings, half of which may be suicides, the other half
Correct.
of which are accidents. And that will only get worse, a lot worse, when we add a number of high-speed trains to what is now a number of Caltrain trains, and the ability to drive across those grade crossings is going to be continually
If I
more
may,
restricted.
I spoke a little too broadly
Yeah.
because I can't speak for San Mateo County, but I can for Santa Clara County. And we have taxed ourselves to eliminate those.
Yes, you have, and I hope that you can help and others can help in pulling together a pretty comprehensive approach to that problem because it's very serious.
I would agree with that. I just wanted to add one point that whether you do a full grade separation or quad gates and fencing are tied to the speed that you operate on in the corridor. We're going to meet all of our safety standards in that corridor. We are major funding partners on a big grade separation there now where we put in on the order of $80 million. And we're eager to work with the local folks, Caltrans and others, on the corridor-wide grade separation program. So that's kind of where we are, but we are fully committed and will be meeting all of the safety requirements at those grade separations.
Thank you,
in
Mr.
that
Chairman.
corridor.
I've overtaken.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. And I do agree with Ms. Lofgren on this. I think everybody up here voted for the NEPA Reciprocity Act, NEPA CEQA, so that we could streamline these projects as we want to do on water, as we're implementing on road projects. And that's why this continues to be a question. If we are so far behind the environmental review, why aren't we doing more to streamline that process? Mr. Kelly, specifically in the Central Valley, one of the big concerns that has come up, and one that I've read in the 2018 business plan, is we're starting with two non-connected segments, one from San Francisco to Gilroy, the other from Madera to Bakersfield, while we wait for, or we figure out what that funding gap is to build the tunnel through the Pacheco. Can you tell me what the new cost of the Central Valley piece of that, which runs from Madera to Shafter, is?
Yeah, give me just 1 second, sorry. We estimate that the Central Valley segment's about 10.6.
10.6 billion, and while we're waiting for that funding gap to come in, that whatever that new revenue is, will we have high-speed rail on that segment?
What we have proposed in the business plan is to, and we're, I should say, we have brought on a new early train operator, and we're working with them to analyze this. But what we want to do is, once we complete the 119-mile segment, look at expanding further into Bakersfield, and then getting an operating run going on just the Central Valley side. That would be Bakersfield further north, either to Madera or Merced on that side. That analysis is underway now. We're going to update where we are on that in our project update report in March. But the idea is to see if we can operate a service there on that side. As I said earlier, extend the electrification on the west side and see if we can get some operable segments in place while we work through the tunneling issues in the middle.
Thank you. And Mr. Thompson, considering this funding gap, at least especially on the first phase of this, shows $7 billion. I think $7 billion to go to build a tunnel. We're somewhere in between $2 and $9 billion on the funding gap. What is the peer review recommended to fill the funding gap, both the short term and long term?
We have made no recommendations. We simply listed some things that the legislature might consider.
What are those things that you listed?
Well, we listed such things as an increase in the gas tax.
Do you know what that increase of gas tax would be?
I haven't calculated it.
What else
recently? Sales tax, that was a proposal to finance the 2000 business plan.
Do we know what that sales tax would be?
At that point, it was a quarter cent. It might be more than that now. I don't know. There are other sources available. One of the things that will be necessary is to put a floor under the cap and trade funding. Otherwise, it won't be financeable. So those are sources, but we have not recommended anything.
I think the current gas tax, based on what I'd read, was I think we're for 12 cents is $5 billion annually. Mr. Hunter, do you know?
Yeah, it's just short of
$5 billion.
You're correct.
How much, so given that parameter,
well,
both short and long term, Mr. Kelly, you can answer
I just from my
sure
old,
you know these
my old
numbers?
hat, I think every penny raises about $150 million in California on the gas tax.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Hunter, as again, I said, you did what you said you were going to do. You've hired veterans. You've hired a lot of locals in the community. What is the current estimate of how many people have been hired, either by job years or by numbers?
Well, we have around in excess of 2,000 right now, but there's been several thousand that's transitioned through as their work finished and they moved on. But we're sustaining around 2,200. I believe that.
Those are individuals?
Yes, individuals.
But you calculate this normally, labor calculates by job years?
Yeah.
So some have come in and some have gone out. Do you know what those job years are?
Yeah. As of this time, I'm not sure. The way that we're looking at it right now and the amount of workers we've got on there for the length of the project, we're believing somewhere to 240,000 man years, which are and women years too, because we've got a lot of good women electricians and other people out there. I just thought I'd get that. In the building trades, we're constantly trying to change our language to adopt to the workforce, and so 1 day of 8 hours for a worker moved to 240,000 years. So it's substantial. I'm not sure of exactly what the man hours are at this time. It's been in excess of $2 billion of work in the Central Valley, and it's driven thousands of jobs for local workers.
So, do I hear you saying it's 240,000
Man years.
man/women years?
Women years. Thank you for that. In the construction, and we believe that's a line. We've got vast experience in tunneling, both in Los Angeles. We're doing the mass transit. Of course, we were the workforce of the BART and onto the Delta. A mile of subway in Paris is around 500 million subway, including
Yeah.
stations.
I think this is a critical point, and it's certainly one that I want to better understand as we move forward. According to Prop 1A, this was supposed to create 300,000, I believe, men and women hours through
Years.
the years through the entire project, which was supposed to be done in 2020. So if we've already done 240,000, but yet we've only done a small segment of this so far, and we've still got another 25 years, 20 years to build this thing. Mr. Kelly, you
Mr.
want
Chairman, yeah, can I help? We estimate from the investments between 2006 and 2017 that the job years is between 28 and 32,000 to date during that stretch.
Okay.
The 240,000 job year references for the full build-out of the valley-to-valley service. That will create 240,000 job years and $50 billion worth of economic output.
over the life of the project?
During the construction piece of that
Does
project.
that change whether or not we have longer delays?
I'm sorry.
I mean, going, instead of completing it in 2020, if this is now going to be 2033 or beyond, does that number change? Does it extrapolate more jobs if a project has a longer time period?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm
Thompson, you-
answering this, I'm sorry.
Either one. I just-
Yeah, not sure if I'm answering this exactly on point. I just say that our estimates are tied to the schedule that we have. So we've laid out what the Central Valley and what the Central Valley is from '06 to '17, and our estimate on Valley to Valley is for that full build-out under our schedule. That's the 240,000 job years that we estimate. And that's under the current schedule to 2029.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of very quick questions. Mr. Scoville, the issue of NEPA being taken over by the state, why hasn't the FRA completed that? They've had 67 days to do it since June 1st.
Can't answer for FRA, sir. That'll be a question for us and as we go forward with the audit.
Okay. So it is one,
Part of the risk.
one particular issue then which we could bang on the FRA to get that done. That would then free up both money and time. Secondly, Mr. Thompson, you have stated categorically that the fundamental problem is we don't have a funding source going forward. And if we had that, things would be better, but not necessarily solved. I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee. In the next couple of days, the President's going to sign the new National Defense Authorization Act, which confirms once again that we'll have a 330-ship Navy someday within the next 15 years. There is no secure funding for the remaining 100 ships to get to 330. That's both replacement as well as the $12 to $15 billion for 2 new aircraft carriers. So the funding source, even for the U.S. Navy and our national defense, is an ongoing issue year by year going forward. I'll just point that out, that for major projects, and this is about a 2-decade to finish this total project, yes, we should be concerned about a secure funding source, but it looks to me like, Mr. Kelly, you have secured about 80% of the funding necessary to complete what you now call the step 1 of phase 1, which is the tunnel and San Francisco to Bakersfield. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So about 80% of that, in your estimation, has been secured. That's
Yes,
a whole lot better than we're doing with regard to a 330-ship Navy, or the $1 trillion for replacing our entire nuclear, strategic nuclear systems. We're not even close to next year, let alone the next 20 years to complete those projects. So this is not unheard of, but you're 80%, is that correct?
Yeah, we estimate about 22, the only caveat here is that our cap and trade dollars, we have to do an estimate of.
Understood.
So we're going to be between 22 and 28 on that, and our estimate of cost is 29.
And
So
that-
we have a gap between 2 and $8 billion.
Okay, so about 80% is secure, assuming the cap and trade
That's
continues to
correct.
produce.
That is correct.
Fair enough. Now, with regard to the development of the tunnel project, which seems to be together with the train operation, we've not talked about the train operation piece of this. Can you go into that? You have talked about the tunnel. Let's talk about the train operation.
Can you be a little bit more specific when you say the train operation?
Your ETO.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, before I arrived, the authority in making sure it can transition to operations went out and went through an RFP process and brought in an early train operator. Deutsche Bahn from Germany, who has great experience running high-speed rail, is now advising us on a couple of fronts. One, they are doing the analysis necessary to see if we can do our operating segments on both the west side, Gilroy to San Francisco, and in the Central Valley to assure that we can start a service and meet our legal requirements in doing so. So that work is underway. And then secondly, I asked them to take a look at our cost estimates in the business plan, to be another set of eyes on that and advise us on the reasonableness of those estimates. And we will have that done this fall, and we will report that to all of our oversight committees in March of 2019.
Good. I think I've got about a minute left here. Mr. Thompson, you have 4 options.
Yes, sir.
Could you run quickly through them and your preferred choice among the 4?
Well, we listed 4 options. Basically, one of them is to stop now.
Is that a good idea?
No, it is not a good idea.
Second option?
Second option would be to finish up just what they're doing in the Central Valley. That would then protect against the federal claim of the money back, but it wouldn't give you much of value. The
Is that a
third
good option?
Third option is essentially what they are proposing, which is to finish the work that they're trying to do on the bookends plus the Central Valley. That will keep the project alive, it will keep it going, and it will get something of value, at least on the bookends and in the Central Valley. The fourth option, and this actually is an answer to your observation, the fourth option would basically be for the legislature and the governor to recommit to the project and to say, we really want to do it in the face of the uncertainties and the problems that we now know, and that we will find the funding to get the project done.
Which is precisely what the U.S. Congress did in the National Defense Authorization Act. It committed itself to a 330-ship Navy, to $1 trillion for the repurposing and upbuilding of our nuclear deterrent. Money's not there, the commitment is.
If I were an admiral, I would feel much better about that, and if I had an appropriation to build that carrier, I would spend that money. What's needed here is in a sense the state equivalent of that, in which the state would look at one of the recommendations we made is that they go back to the state transportation plan, make sure this fits the requirements that the state wants, and then commit to getting the job done. The problem that we are concerned about, and we've expressed this many times, is that it's very difficult to manage a $100 billion or $50 billion project with only $20 billion in hand. It's just very difficult. You have to restructure your commitments. You have to manage it in a different way. You have to take risks that you really shouldn't have to take. If the state wants to do this, the resources they can find, and they should do the project.
My time is over. My final 15 seconds, which is not really available, but if the chairman doesn't shut me up, is that the Congress this year will not complete a massive infrastructure program, but it is in the works that all of us are committed to a major national infrastructure program. And the question for us is, will high-speed rail be part of that infrastructure program, which includes everything from water to sanitation to transportation of all kinds? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The next chairman of the TNOW committee will get it done.
And as the new ranking member,
Mr. Lamalfa, recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes,
You can see we all get along pretty well on a T&I committee.
DeFazio.
Mr. DeFazio will get it done.
Mr. Kelly, once again here,
Remember your support.
when the original vote was approved, it was a $33 billion project, and we found out just a couple years later, it was a $98.5 billion project. It was downsized, just right at $100 billion now. So I guess what I would wonder if, I carried two bills about it in the state Senate, which my good friend heard in committee for us. They didn't pass, but that's another thing. Senate Bill 22 was to stop spending until there was a complete plan of where the rail was going to go, what the route was, how it was going to be paid for. Didn't pass. Another bill, SB 985, which reflected the $98.5 billion price tag we found about in November of 2011, to put it back on the ballot in front of the voters. So I guess I would pose to you or anybody watching, if you were bid for your home to replace a roof, let's say $33,000, and then when the construction people show up and the price jumped to $98,500, would you want another crack at a rebid or a revote, something like that? I think the people of California would on revoting the rail. So that said, we've heard about the problems with funding just the Pacheco tunnel, which is a little bitty one, compared to the one you're going to have to go through the Tehachapi's with, if that's indeed how you're going to link to the big prize, L.A., where the ridership's supposed to come in. Do you currently have a cost or an actual plan for how, with the seismic issues or whatever the challenges are of running that tunnel through Tehachapi, how that's going to go? What is the price? Is it engineered out? Does that even fit with what I talked about in SB 22? Is it even part of a plan?
It is part of the plan to go through both the Tehachapi's and the San Gabriels to get into the LA basin. Engineers are going through the work to make sure we deal with the seismic issues. We have as an advisory body the State Seismic Advisory Board, who we are interacting with on those tunneling exercises.
So in 2018, they're just now going through
they've started. That work is underway. I mean, as I said earlier,
but it's not finished. We don't know the price.
It's not. Eight of our 10 segments are still in environmental, but we move designs along as we go through that process. That segment down there is still in environmental, but we are working through that process. It is designed further enough where we can make cost estimates, and we have a cost estimate for that tunneling exercise that has a big swing right now because it could be as little as 12 or as much as 25, depending on what you do at the end.
12 to 25 billion
Yeah.
in comparison to the 7 billion of the Pacheco Pass.
That's correct.
Yeah. How many more miles is the Tehachapi?
I think I'm going to ballpark this for here. I can get you the specifics, but I think we have on the order of 35 miles in tunneling through both mountain segments.
35 miles of tunneling versus 13, was it, at
That's about right.
Pacheco? So
That's
almost
about
triple.
right. Yeah, but yeah, and we have not made our final design choices yet, and that's going to drive costs as well.
So we don't
Our
have
estimates in the business plan, I should say, do account for those swings.
So 10 years after the bond, we don't really know what that plan is and what the price tag is with money that is relied upon at $750 million at a time from cap and trade, since there's no other funding coming available.
I would say
to fill the gap of
I'd say-
$87 billion.
Sorry.
Go ahead, of $87 billion to fill the gap.
I just say we certainly know what the plan is. It's consistent with our programmatic plan to do that. We're now going through the on-the-ground environmental process to wrap that up, and we refine costs as we go forward. That's actually one of the reasons why in this business plan for the first time, we do lay out a baseline cost estimate, but we put it in ranges because we are early in the
Unfortunately, the
project
plan
delivery
keeps
process.
changing from CEO to chairman to CEO changes. So tell me about the high-speed rail, the high-speed portion of itself, please. A recent study was done by the authority to show that you can make it just in time on 2 hours and 40 minutes if everything goes perfectly. But also, there's some wiggle room on actually running the trains at high speed because the bond, according to your officials, have long contended the legal fine print does not actually require them to operate trains on such a schedule. So it raises the idea that the state is spending billions on a capacity that it won't actually use because, as this was voted in the legislature, there was a lot of assembly members and senators that wanted to stop in their town, have it hit Hanford, have it hit Pixley, have it hit, no, Pixley's Petticoat Junction, I'm sorry. But that's every other burg on the way there. So how many trains are you going to run per day at truly high speed? in order to achieve, if everything goes perfectly, 2 hours and 40 minutes?
Well, I think it's worth noting here, because I know that this was part of the conversation earlier. The bond requires that we design the system to be capable of nonstop service between San Francisco and Los Angeles at 2 hours and 40 minutes. We are designing it to that, and our calculations show we are meeting that.
As a taxpayer, how many trains will I get that actually run per day at that speed?
We don't, I mean, that's part of the work we're doing with the early train operator, how the system is going to operate. Some will stop at cities. I mean, the reference to 3 hours and 10 minutes is an assumption that we have 2 stops along the way. We will have some nonstop train service, but I can't tell you today exactly how many. We're still in the process of
So me, the voter, when I
figuring
was
that out.
getting my bid for my new roof back in 2008, I didn't get to have that information at how many trains you're going to run at full speed or part speed, how much the tunnel was going to be under Pacheco or Tehachapi. We're finding out in 2018, and you're asking us in one fashion or another to keep the faith in this project, whose price has tripled, whose every other number that assigned to it. You had 1 million person years of work assigned to this at one point. They're saying 1 million at one point. Ridership cost was supposed to be tied to a Southwest Airlines ticket of about $80. A later hearing said it's probably going to be 120, 150, 200. Who's going to afford to ride this? Every mark has been missed on every promise made, not by you. You've only been there 6 months. Now you have total consciences, and so you know what's going on. But every mark has ever been missed. Even Quentin Kopp, the original champion of this thing, has pulled his support of this. And so why are we to keep going, especially as mine and Mr. Garamendi's district burns? And, you know, Mr. Hunter, I want your men and women to have a lot of work to do. And indeed we do. We got forestry infrastructure we need. We've got biomass infrastructure we need to use that forest product. We have flood control projects that need to be completed or way behind on the Delta and everywhere else, mine and Mr. Garamendi district. Water storage, we could build 20 dams for the price of what they want to spend on high-speed rail. 20 dams. Heck, if we built 4, I'd be happy. Highway repairs, airport runway extensions, even upgrades to conventional rails that would run trains at 120 miles an hour and get almost there as fast by the time you stop in every little burg, to have pretty decent train service. And so instead, we get this, and we're going to pin it on maybe another gas tax or further taxation. And then on top of that, when we talk about investment going into the bay, we're going to then put the urban sprawl in the valley and run their housing prices up from 350,000 or so now to start matching the Bay Area 1 million. I mean, there's a lot of ripple effects as we pave through that farmland down there, and we eminent domain people, and at the same time we're tearing out almond orchards to make way. And I hear from the rail authority they want to plant trees to offset the CO2 that they're producing with the equipment that they're building the rail system with. It just continues to confound me. Why would we keep going on this? So panelists, thank you for your time today. Mr. Chairman, thank you for a little extra time. I appreciate having this opportunity to put this out in front of the people of California.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you. You know, we sometimes think about people in terms of their political ideology, Republicans or Democrats, but I'd like to step back and look at this in terms, as the only representative here on the panel from Southern California. We have everyone else is from the North. What do I do when I go home? What do I tell the folks in Los Angeles? Much of the discussion so far has been on the Central Valley part. We've talked about the Trans Bay Terminal down to San Jose, the Caltrain, and what's going to happen there. We've talked a little bit about Silicon Valley out to talk to me, any of you. What do I go home and tell the people in Los Angeles? Where is that focus? We're the population center. We're the largest part of the population center. When are we going to be involved in this? And what is going on that I can say, go look, go see what's happening? This is really where your high-speed rail money, and this is how you'll benefit. So I just need a little bit to go home, what you would think I should be saying. I understand the bookends. We put that. I personally wanted to see much more money go out to Palmdale from, because I thought then it could be. connected out to Vegas. But that would have been another project and another thing. I'm just saying, what do I see and when will I see things in Los Angeles that will justify all of us? We were the folks that voted for this.
Well, let me take a shot. First is, as you alluded to, we are now full investment partners on $500 million worth of both the LA Union Station rebuild that'll come down there and the grade separation at Rosecrans Marquardt. That will not just benefit high-speed rail, but will also benefit your regional providers down there.
Right.
So we're part and parcel of that. We are this fall picking our preferred alternatives to get to complete the environmental work down in that section for the 3 stretches between Palmdale all the way to Anaheim. And we are working closely with others on investments in shared corridors, which the legislature here recently put forth a funding package for rail modernization investment in shared corridors like the corridor between Burbank and Anaheim that we can invest in. We've been doing modeling exercises with BNSF and the other rail operators to figure out how we can all co-locate and co-work in that area. And ultimately, I think it will lead to a funding agreement between the partners like we have in Silicon Valley with Caltrain on how we move forward to make the right capital investments in those corridors. So we have estimated a 2033 timeline, but I'm hoping once we get the environmental stuff done, which we are going to do by 2022, we'll move more quickly on shared corridor targeted investments throughout that area that will be including grade separations and other things to get the electrified segments in place down there. And ultimately, we do need more revenue for that area, and we have to work through that. But there are things that people will see in terms of advancement down there starting later this fall, and capital investments underway now through our bookend dollars and the shared corridor program to help us get going.
Mr. Thompson, when are we going to see something?
I have to defer to Brian. He knows that answer much better than I do.
Because while this is an issue, because there's a lot going on in the north, there really is, as it should, we're not hearing anything really in the south. And, I'm just saying, what do I do to go home and tell people? I'm up here, we had a lot of discussion about what is actually happening, little discussion about Los Angeles and how that's going to be connected. Mr. Hunter.
Congressman, you can't tell by my Irish brogue, but I lived in L.A. for 35 years, and
We can tell.
And when I was in Fresno and we were, kicking off the construction, I said the Irish have a great history of building railroads in this country, but we're going to find the workers right here in Fresno, Madera, and in the valley to build this project, and that's what we've done. But we are working on a 1-mile overpass in Rosecrans. We're in at Union Station. We've opened construction yards in Bakersfield. We have done the Measure R for transit systems within L.A. I've worked on the Burbank Transit Center. And of course, we've been in Orange County and done the massive transit center. So, it's rocks skipping along the river, but they're all in a line, and I think it's going to work for us.
I'm just saying it's a hard sell now because we don't really see those kinds of impacts. You're going to see much more of it up in the north, as it should. And I'm not saying it should, but I'm just saying we have a difficult sell because we're not, there are small pieces as we're doing, but we're not really seeing a real stretch that's going to be high-speed rail, or that we're saying, see that area. We're going to be able to get from Bakersfield to Los Angeles in 5 years or 8 years. That's on the drawing board. That's way in the future yet.
I think it will be clarified further when we complete the environmental work down there and we can start making investments on the shared corridor, and I think people will start to see that.
I sure hope so, because we don't, right now, we're not seen as part of this. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. We are going just a little bit over time today. We're going to conclude here shortly, but we've been yielding Republican time to Mr. DeSaulnier today. We're glad to have him back on the Republican side. Even for only one day, we'll take it.
I don't think I'd ever get out of a primary. Well, I want to touch on a little bit what Alan's talking about and the challenge to get to L.A., and you both alluded to it. So, Mr. Thompson, you mentioned the mega project hearings we had, and in the Flyberg report on all the mega projects in the world. He estimated that there's, not estimated, he found that on tunneling projects in particular and high-speed rail in particular, the cost overruns, the assumption that they were very significant. I can't remember what they were, but 30% or something like that. So given the challenges of getting over the Tehachapies, and Brian, maybe you could answer this too, where the grade is significantly higher than anywhere else, the grade for high-speed rail, I'm told by people around the world, should be about 3%. There it's as much as 6%. So how are we going to get through the Tehachapies, and what is the real cost going to be in order to link up? And I know this is, I agree with what the authority is doing in terms of changing the strategy because of this, but maybe Mr. Thompson and Mr. Kelly, you could talk to that.
Well, just briefly, in history, in the 2012 business plan, the authority was undecided at the draft plan whether they were going to go south or north. And at that point, we recommended strongly that they go south because that's where the demand is.
That's right.
Unfortunately, in history, what happened with what the budget that they had, and this loops back to the problem we're discussing, they had to make the choice to go north because they only had enough money to go in that direction. But there was never any question that the right decision would have been to go south. Now, in the 2018 business plan, we're at the point where they can't quite complete the northern link either. And so we are still at this point of funding, and what's the funding source that they can rely on. As to the engineering issues of the Tehachapies, I don't know that that's any more difficult than Pacheco. There are earthquake problems, there are geological problems, and I know you're doing more and more work on this. But I think what I would say, as you suggest, the Fluberg analysis suggests that you better not be proud of your numbers until you've actually done it. And here, I think we just have to face up to the fact that the numbers have a pretty wide range of variation around them. They just do, and there is no way at this stage to eliminate that until you actually have final designs and engineering estimates to do the work. And even then, you never know when you start drilling the hole what you're going to find. So let's be careful about commitment is fine, but let's be careful about what those numbers mean.
Brian, and the Japanese are the world experts at this. They've done it the most, so I hope you have conversations with them as well.
Yeah, we are, and in fact, we put in our business plan, and by the end of the year, we're hosting a tunneling symposium that will bring in international expertise on this issue, where again, this tunneling stuff, it seems a little foreign here when you talk about tunnels for high-speed rail, but they're building them all over the world successfully, and we intend to do that too. One comment I just make about the tough choice on the north versus south, the authority has had, I think appropriately, a philosophy that we maintain in our business plan now. Because we are in a constrained funding environment, we have to make investments that will have that we can complete real mobility benefits out of, and we don't have every dime we need. And so the assessment was made that we can get further by going north and providing mobility and environmental and benefits in the short term with the money that we had. And if we had all the money we could, we may have made a different choice, because it is more expensive to go south. The Tehachapies are tough, but we didn't have all those dollars in hand, so we made the call we made. And I still think, and we are proposing in the business plan to use a building block approach to find midterm mobility, environmental, economic benefits as we build the whole Valley system, then get that operational and use some of those revenues to go south. The only thing I'd say on the tunneling piece, it's important to note that in the business plan and our use of ranges on costs account for some of this difficulty and the decisions we have to make on the designing point. That's why, for the first time, we put ranges in this. We're looking at these things, and if the low end could be this, if some of these difficulties are solved, the high end's a little bit different depending on how bad it is, and we refine those costs over time. So every time we come back, those ranges will narrow, and we'll get to a refined cost as we go forward.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sonnier. Ms. Lofgren.
Just a few other observations or questions. I think this has been a very helpful hearing, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being included. Thinking about big projects in our history, when Eisenhower announced we were going to do the Interstate Highway Project, we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. We didn't have the money in hand, and yet if we didn't have the Interstate Highway Program, the country would be in serious problems. So that really goes to the issue, if we don't do this, what will we face? Now, I remember seeing some estimates. For the lack of this investment, we would have to make different investments in airports and lanes of highway and the like. Can you tell me, Mr. Kelly, there's no cost-free way out of this if we're going to continue to grow and have a vibrant economy, isn't that right?
No, as I described this project as transformative before, because I think it achieves what we want to achieve in California with our transportation investments. From a mobility perspective, there's no other single project I could point to that can reduce travel times like this can. Getting from Fresno to San Jose, you can build a lot more freeways, but those cars are not going to travel at 200 miles an hour. And so you can't get that mobility benefit by just doing that. Not to mention, I think we already seeing in California, because of the housing issue, you're seeing more and more people move and migrate toward the Central Valley for affordability of housing.
Right.
But today they're driving to the job centers of the coast, and that is adding to congestion, air quality issues, and other things. And this is about defeating that by offering a better alternative. And that's what we're putting forth here. To your question about other investments, I know there was an analysis done, I think, in 2012 that suggested, the mobility benefits and the ridership numbers that we see and what you will provide here, it's the equivalent of building 4,300 lanes of highway, expanding every airport's runway, which is difficult in California now, and those costs are in excess of $150 billion to do those things. So, it is all about choices. For me, in my time here, again, I haven't seen a project that I think can deliver the mobility, economic, and environmental benefits that this can, and that's why I'm here.
Well, I'm sympathetic to the point made by Mr. Lowenthal, because we all have, our bosses are the voters in our districts, and we have to have them understand why this is of value. But I think if at a 2030 completion date, very few of us are going to be in the Congress by the time this is all done. And yet, it's still important for the future of our state that we have this. We want an economy. People have to be able to move around. And so we have to have some patience here, which is tough to do, along with some creativity to find the missing pieces. But I just really want to thank all of the witnesses here. You've been enlightening to us. You've played an important role for our state, and it's important what you do. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Loughlin. Just finally, as we close out here, a couple of issues on procedure going forward with this new audit. Mr. Scoville, if you could just answer a couple things as we go forward. First of all, why did you initiate doing the FRI's oversight on this? What were the red flags that allowed you to say, yes, we need to audit this?
We needed to audit the California high-speed rail system, the proposal, and the federal money in it for a number of reasons. First, FRA has appreciable dollars in it. It's in for the tune of about $3.5 billion total. $2.5 billion of that has already been spent. There's a matching requirement on the state authority to match their share so that the federal dollars will be put to best use. This kind of grant-making effort is new for FRA. For many decades, FRA was a safety regulatory body. With PREA in 2008, followed very quickly by the Recovery Act and appropriations thereafter, FRA needed to transform themselves. We've talked about transformative efforts, but this has been a significant lift for FRA. At times, they've struggled with it, and I don't mean to cast that in an overly negative light, but they've had to work from behind the ball. One of the members mentioned the economic climate that we suffered in 2008, 2009, and FRA was working very hard. with interim guidance for this new grant-making program, with staffing shortfalls, with training and guidance shortcomings, which they recognized, but they needed to get the money out the door, and they needed to demonstrate it in a very public way. Since then, not only with the project approval efforts, but also with the amendment and monitoring efforts, FRA has worked as best they could. My office has provided oversight for them, provided numerous helpful recommendations, we trust, and FRA has been attentive and responsive, very much to their credit. And I do want to go on record today as citing them for those accomplishments. But at the same time, now we need to recognize that the federal investment is at stake. FRA has continuing interest, not only to see the match through, but also to make good on what Mr. Kelly has described as the requirements for acceptable interim use of the 119-mile Central Valley segment, and also 20 years thereafter, after the match has been satisfied, for the requirement in the grant now for maintenance of the federally funded portion in a state of good repair. So all of that is the FRA's interest, and those are the interests of our audit. To be clear, we're not here to audit or to answer larger questions about where the state should find its own funding.
Sure.
We are here to make sure that FRA satisfies its obligations under law, part of which are to pay close attention to the rail authority. We will use FRA from time to time as a lens into the authority's business, particularly when it comes to validating FRA's efforts to validate federal expenditures to date and funds that have been advanced as meeting the matching requirement.
And these new authorities under the FRA and the new obligations with the California High-Speed Rail, what options does FRA have at hand to collect funding? With the state match, what is your leverage to making sure that that state match actually happens? What can you hold up? What?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, FRA has leverage. First of all, it still has unexpended funds, $928 million appropriated in FY 2010. That funding slice could be suspended or even terminated should the state authority fail to make the match. Advancing beyond that, there's the question of an administrative offset, as it's known, which means that for further FRA grant funds to the state, for DOT grant funds, and even for funds payable by the United States at large to the state of California, there could be administrative offsets in order to satisfy or to be applied against the missing state match. Beyond that, there's a possible action under the Debt Collection Act of 1982, not frequently invoked, but that is on the books. It's a possible remedy. In very recent history, that act was invoked by the department in a dispute that it had ongoing with the state of New Jersey concerning about $250 million at stake in the Access to the Region's Core major infrastructure project in the New York, New Jersey region. Finally, and this would be I would consider it a drastic measure, but the California High-Speed Rail Authority could be suspended or debarred from further participation in DOT's surface transportation financial assistance programs. That would require a finding by FRA and the department that the authority was not presently responsible, which sounds innocuous enough, but certainly for an entity like the authority and for the state of California at large, that would have tremendous impact. But that's the legal requirement for a suspension or debarment action to take place.
Thank you. And finally, last question, as you're going to this new audit, are there findings that you found in the 2015 audit that you feel are relevant in this one?
Yes. Our 2015 audit looked at the amendment processes and guidance that FRA had in place, not only with respect to the California grant, but to all of its grants across the board. And we also looked in that same audit, in the 2015 audit, into the monitoring procedures that FRA had in place. And we found shortcomings on the amendment side. On the policy or guidance proposals, The policy pertaining to the possibility of a tapered match, which had been entered into by FRA with the state authority in 2012, that was in place and appeared to us to be reasonably satisfactory. On the other hand, aspects of guidance that pertained to other issues that might come up in the course of amendment negotiations between FRA and other possible grantees. Parts of those guidance were incomplete. Other pieces of guidance were, frankly, missing. And so we cited those in our recommendations to FRA. On the monitoring side, we found that FRA had not insufficient procedures in place to account for shortcomings that it found in its own reviews of certain grantees. And in fact, some of the shortcomings that we found insufficiently documented by FRA pertained to shortcomings that had been found by FRA with respect to the California grant and the California authority. Things like schedule slips and risk management plans, cost estimates, all of which the authority was on the hook to provide FRA. FRA had closed those findings without documenting them, which put the authority and FRA behind going forward if they needed to revisit any of those issues. There would be no corporate memory on that stuff. So we recommended that they clean up all of that process. And they have followed through on that, again, very much to their credit for FRA.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly, you have any
just-
final parting words to?
Yeah, I just think it may be helpful for the committee to know that just where we are on the match. It was stated earlier that with a $2.5 billion match requirement, we're about $937 million into that. From a time perspective, we're about 15% through the time, and we're about 40%, just under 40% on having met our match. So we're ahead of pace on meeting the match for these federal funds.
Well, thank you. Thank you to each of our witnesses. Certainly thank you to each of our members to come to this hearing. As I've said before, this is a critical issue. It is one of the largest projects in the entire country, if not the largest project, which is why we've held 4 oversight hearings out of the 6 years that I've been chair of this committee. Before I close out today, let me yield the gentleman from Sacramento a couple of minutes in close.
Let me take first portion of those 2 minutes to thank you for the intense interest over the period of time that you've applied to this. I also recall a conversation I had with Mr. Desailliers on the floor of the House some time ago, in which he said we need to look at all of the infrastructure in its totality and in the ways in which it all fits together. It's not an isolated project. High-speed rail is not an isolated project, he said. It fits into the highway, it fits into the airports, it fits into the ports, and all of that infrastructure. And in that context, this is an important part. I just note that if we don't do this, then what must we do for transportation? And it is a number perhaps twice as big as this one project just to do that. And so, Mr. Chairman, as you continue your work as the next ranking member of the full committee, we look forward to our work together. And with that, thank you for this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi.
We shall see.
One of the most important parts of this hearing is what we do after the hearing and making sure that we provide questions in writing to follow up on these details and request answers back from each one of you. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you again for your testimonies. If there are no further questions, I'd ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearings remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them by writing. Unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Again, I'd like to thank our witnesses again for their testimony. No other members have anything to add? The hearing stands adjourned.